Have you ever been told that if you just work harder, stay up later, push through the pain, and never give up, then you'll finally be successful? And once you're successful, then you'll finally be happy? It's the story we've all been taught since childhood. Happiness is the reward you earn after the struggle, after the promotion, after the finish line. But what if everything you've been told about success and happiness is completely backward? What if happiness isn't the result of success, but the very cause of it? What if the key to working smarter, being more creative, energetic, resilient, productive, and even more intelligent begins not with grinding harder, but with training your brain to see the world differently? These are the questions that ignite the heart of Shawn Achor's groundbreaking book, The Happiness Advantage: The 7 Principles of Positive Psychology That Fuel Success and Performance at Work. Shawn Achor isn't just a writer preaching positivity. He's a Harvard-trained researcher who spent over a decade living, teaching, and studying within the high-pressure halls of one of the world's most competitive universities. As a teaching fellow at Harvard, Achor worked directly with students who, despite being among the brightest minds on the planet, were often burned out, anxious, and deeply unhappy. Watching these brilliant young adults crumble under the weight of expectation sparked a question that changed his life, and now, the lives of millions around the world. Why are some people able to thrive in stressful, high-achieving environments while others collapse under the same conditions? The answer led him into the cutting-edge science of positive psychology, a field that explores not just what makes people survive, but what makes them flourish. In The Happiness Advantage, Achor reveals that happiness is not a luxury reserved for the lucky few who make it to the top. It's a mindset and a skill, one that can be cultivated through small, daily habits that literally rewire your brain for positivity and success. Backed by years of psychological research, neuroscience, and real-world case studies from Fortune 500 companies and universities across the globe, Achor explains that happiness fuels performance, not the other way around. When we're happy, our brains release dopamine and serotonin, neurochemicals that make us more motivated, more creative, more resilient, and yes, even more intelligent. This is the happiness advantage, the competitive edge that allows individuals and organizations to rise above challenges and perform at their best. Achor breaks down his research into 3 transformative parts. In Part 1, he introduces us to the discovery of the happiness advantage, how it was born in the classrooms of Harvard, tested in corporate boardrooms, and proven in everyday life. Part 2 is the beating heart of the book, the 7 Principles of Positive Psychology. Each principle gives you a practical, science-backed strategy for rewiring your mindset and unlocking your potential, from the fulcrum and the lever, which teaches how shifting your mental perspective can shift your entire reality, to the Tetris effect, where training your brain to scan for the positive instead of the negative opens up endless opportunities for growth. You'll also learn how to fall up, to turn failure into fuel for success, and how small, intentional habits, like the 20-second rule, can help you make positive change last. Finally, in Part 3, Achor explores the ripple effect, how happiness spreads through social connection, influencing teams, families, and communities, proving that positivity is contagious and transformational. So why should you listen to this audiobook? Because the happiness advantage doesn't just tell you to be happy. It shows you how to become happy and how that happiness can become your most powerful tool for success. This is not about ignoring challenges or pretending life is perfect. It's about understanding that the most successful, fulfilled, and creative people aren't those who never fail, but those who use positivity as a foundation to bounce back faster, think clearer, and connect deeper. Achor promises that if you apply these 7 principles, you'll see measurable improvements in your performance, your health, and your relationships, and most importantly, in your overall sense of joy and purpose. The big promise of this book is bold yet beautifully simple. If you can change your mindset, you can change your world. This isn't wishful thinking. It's a proven science that shows how happiness gives you a real, measurable advantage in every area of life. As you listen, you'll begin to see that happiness isn't the distant prize at the end of the race. It's the fuel that powers every step of the journey. So lean in, open your mind, and get ready to discover how optimism, creativity, energy, and connection can transform your life from the inside out. Because once you unlock the happiness advantage, success doesn't just become possible, it becomes inevitable. And now that you understand the powerful truth behind happiness and success, it's time to step right into the story to see where it all began. Let's open Chapter 1, Discovering the Happiness Advantage, and join Shawn Achor on his journey from the dorm rooms of Harvard to the front lines of positive psychology, where the science of happiness first came to life. Welcome to Chapter 1, Discovering the Happiness Advantage, a story that begins not in a lab or a corporate boardroom, but in the ivy-covered dormitories of Harvard University, one of the most prestigious, competitive, and high-pressure environments in the world. Here, surrounded by some of the planet's brightest young minds, Shawn Achor began a journey that would turn the traditional understanding of happiness and success upside down. This chapter is the foundation of the entire book, the moment where the author first uncovers the idea that would later inspire a global movement in positive psychology. It's the story of how Achor realized that happiness isn't the result of success. Happiness is the fuel that creates success. Achor begins by describing his arrival at Harvard as a small-town kid from Waco, Texas, someone who applied on a dare, never truly believing he'd get in. When he did, he carried an immense sense of gratitude and wonder. To him, Harvard was more than just an opportunity. It was a privilege. But as he spent 12 years teaching and mentoring students there, Achor began to notice something strange, something that didn't fit the story society had told him about success and happiness. He saw students who, despite achieving what most of the world would consider the pinnacle of success, were deeply unhappy. They were anxious, depressed, and under constant pressure. They were surrounded by opportunity, yet felt trapped in their own stress. How could that be? Shouldn't success automatically bring happiness? This question became the spark for Achor's life's work. He calls this realization paradise lost and found. Many Harvard students entered their freshman year thrilled to be there, excited and grateful. But over time, that joy faded. They stopped seeing Harvard as a gift and began to focus solely on competition, grades, and comparison. Achor noticed that two students could live in the same environment and have completely different experiences, one feeling inspired, the other overwhelmed. The difference wasn't in their circumstances, it was in their mindset. Their interpretation of reality, not reality itself, determined their happiness. The happiest students weren't those with the least stress, but those who saw their challenges as opportunities for growth. Achor's travels later reinforced this lesson. When he visited Soweto, a township in South Africa, he asked a group of school children, "Who here likes to do schoolwork?" To his surprise, nearly every hand shot up with genuine excitement. For these children, education wasn't a burden, it was a privilege. That single moment revealed the truth he had seen, but not yet put into words. Our happiness depends on the lens through which we view our experiences. Two people can live the same reality, but their interpretation determines whether they feel joy or despair. That's the seed of the happiness advantage. As Achor continued his research, he realized that psychology as a field had long made a critical mistake, a concept he calls the cult of the average. Traditional psychology, he explains, has focused almost entirely on studying what's normal or average. Researchers remove outliers, those who perform exceptionally well or are unusually happy, to better understand the majority. But Achor argues that if we only study average, we'll only ever be average. Instead of deleting those positive outliers, He wanted to learn from them, from the people who thrive in high-stress environments, who find happiness and success even in difficult conditions. What are they doing differently? What can they teach us about human potential? That's the question that transforms psychology from the study of what's broken into the study of what works. He also points out another problem: the overwhelming focus on the negative. For decades, psychology concentrated on mental illness, depression, anxiety, and failure. There were 17 studies on what makes us unhappy for every single study on what makes us thrive. The result? A world that knows everything about misery and almost nothing about joy. Achor challenges this by showing that the same scientific rigor used to study disease can be applied to study happiness. And when we do, we discover something revolutionary. Positive emotions don't just make us feel good, they make us perform better. Through his experiences teaching the wildly popular positive psychology course at Harvard, which quickly became the most attended class at the university, Achor discovered that even the most ambitious, high-achieving students were starving for happiness. They were chasing grades, status, and prestige, but losing sight of meaning and connection. He realized that the students who succeeded long-term were those who invested in relationships, gratitude, and optimism. They didn't wait to be happy until they made it. They chose to be happy now, and that happiness fueled their success. This leads to one of the chapter's biggest revelations. Happiness is a precursor to success, not the other way around. When we feel positive, our brains are more efficient, creative, and resilient. Studies show that doctors in a positive mood make accurate diagnoses 19% faster. Optimistic salespeople outsell their peers by 56%, and students who feel happy before an exam perform significantly better. Happiness, in other words, gives your brain a biological advantage. This is the core promise of the chapter, and of the book itself, that by learning to activate positivity first, you can dramatically improve every area of your life. Achor calls this advantage the happiness advantage because it gives people a measurable edge in performance, health, and success. It's not about ignoring problems or pretending everything is perfect. It's about recognizing that your brain works better when it's positive. This mindset allows you to bounce back faster from failure, handle stress more effectively, and see opportunities where others see obstacles. The chapter also touches on another profound truth. Happiness can be trained. Just like a muscle, your brain grows stronger the more you practice optimism, gratitude, and positive thinking. The old belief that personality and mindset are fixed has been debunked by neuroscience. Through consistent habits, like writing down 3 things you're grateful for each day, or spending more time on social connection, you can literally rewire your brain for happiness. This means that no matter where you start, change is possible. By the end of Chapter 1, Shawn Achor sets up what he calls the 7 principles of positive psychology, the foundation of the book. These 7 ideas will show readers how to apply the happiness advantage to real life, in business, education, relationships, and beyond. They promise to teach you how to shift your mindset, the fulcrum and the lever, how to train your brain to spot opportunities, the Tetris effect, how to rise from failure, falling up, how to take control of chaos, the Zorro circle, how to create lasting habits, the 20-second rule, and how to build powerful social networks, social investment. The big promise of this chapter, and the reason listeners should pay close attention, is that happiness is not a fleeting emotion or a lucky accident. It's a choice, a practice, and a proven strategy for success. Achor's research shows that by cultivating positivity, you can reshape your brain, transform your performance, and create a life filled with meaning, energy, and resilience. So as this chapter closes, the message rings clear and powerful. You don't have to wait for success to be happy. You can start right now. Happiness is not the reward at the end of the road. It's the fuel that powers the entire journey. And once you learn to harness this advantage, everything from your work to your relationships to your future, begins to change for the better. Because when you discover the happiness advantage, you don't just live a happier life, you live a better one. Welcome to Chapter 2, The Happiness Advantage at Work, where Shawn Achor takes the powerful concept of happiness as a competitive edge and brings it into the real world, the fast-paced, high-stakes world of modern work. In this chapter, Achor steps out of the classrooms of Harvard and into boardrooms, law firms, and corporations around the globe, showing that the principles of positive psychology don't just make people feel better, they make organizations perform better. This is where the science meets the hustle, where happiness transforms from a personal philosophy into a business strategy. Achor begins this chapter with a vivid story from his travels in Zimbabwe in 2008, at the height of one of the worst economic collapses in modern history. Flying over the dry savannas, he admits he was nervous. How could he possibly stand before people who had lost almost everything and talk about happiness? When he landed, he met a group of business leaders, and one of them jokingly asked, "How many trillionaires do you know?" Everyone at the table raised their hands, laughing. Of course, it was a joke. Zimbabwe's currency had collapsed to the point where $1 trillion couldn't buy a candy bar. Yet despite this hardship, these people were hungry to hear about resilience, optimism, and hope. That moment changed how Achor saw his work. Even in crisis, happiness is not a luxury. It's a necessity for survival and recovery. From there, he brings us back to the global financial meltdown of 2008 and the struggles of companies like American Express, UBS, and Morgan Stanley, which were facing unprecedented losses, layoffs, and fear. You might think that the last thing these executives wanted to hear about was happiness, but what Achor discovered shocked even him. In the middle of chaos, leaders and employees alike were craving something that would help them rebuild not just their companies, but their confidence, their creativity, and their willpower. The more he spoke, the more he saw that the happiness advantage wasn't just an academic theory, it was a lifeline. Achor's message to them, and to us, is crystal clear. When times are tough, happiness isn't naive optimism or blind cheerfulness. It's a performance strategy. It's a psychological shield against stress, burnout, and failure. Research has shown that when people feel positive, their brains release chemicals like dopamine and serotonin that increase motivation, focus, and problem-solving ability. These aren't just feel-good effects. They're biological advantages that make employees more productive, more engaged, and more resilient. He illustrates this with one of his most striking experiments at KPMG, one of the world's leading accounting firms. In December 2008, as the company prepared for one of the most stressful tax seasons in history, Achor was invited to train 250 managers in positive psychology. He gave them a 3-hour session focused on small, actionable ways to cultivate happiness, gratitude exercises, social connection, and positive habits. Then he measured the results against a control group that didn't receive the training. The outcome was remarkable. Just a week later, those who went through the training showed significantly higher levels of happiness and lower levels of stress. But the real surprise came 4 months later. Even after the toughest part of tax season, the effect still lasted. Those managers reported not only better moods, but also higher job satisfaction, greater feelings of effectiveness, and less burnout. This experiment demonstrated something revolutionary. Happiness training doesn't just boost morale, it changes performance. The positive effects were both measurable and sustainable. Achor's big promise here is that companies can literally improve their bottom line by investing in happiness. When employees feel engaged and optimistic, they don't just survive stress, they thrive under it. Throughout the chapter, Achor shares how organizations across industries, from finance to education to law, began applying these lessons with transformative results. For example, law firms, which have some of the highest rates of depression among professionals, started teaching optimism and resilience techniques to their associates. The results were stunning. Lawyers who practiced these techniques not only felt better, but also handled complex cases with sharper focus and stronger collaboration. Similarly, schools that implemented positive psychology programs saw improved student performance, better teacher engagement, and stronger community morale. Achor introduces the idea of inoculating the brain against stress. Just like a vaccine trains the body to resist disease, positive psychology techniques train the mind to resist negativity. By regularly practicing gratitude, envisioning success, and building strong social support networks, people create mental resilience. This resilience doesn't mean ignoring problems. It means facing them with a stronger mindset. When challenges arise, positive thinkers recover faster, adapt better, and maintain motivation longer. One of the most profound insights from this chapter is that happiness and success are not isolated individual experiences. They are socially contagious. Achor describes how, in the corporate world, a happy leader can lift the mood and productivity of an entire team. Studies have shown that when managers are optimistic, their employees perform better, stay longer, and even report higher customer satisfaction scores. He calls this the ripple effect, the way happiness spreads outward from one person to others, multiplying its impact across an organization or community. And yet, Achor doesn't shy away from addressing skepticism. He acknowledges that many people think happiness has no place in serious business, especially in times of crisis. But he counters this with hard data. Companies that emphasize employee well-being consistently outperform their competitors. They have lower turnover, fewer sick days, higher sales, and stronger innovation. The message is undeniable. Happiness pays. He also critiques how most workplaces treat motivation and productivity. Too often, businesses rely on fear, pressure, and external rewards, bonuses, deadlines, and threats of failure to drive results. But those tactics only create short-term compliance, not long-term excellence. Positive psychology, on the other hand, activates intrinsic motivation, the kind that comes from feeling purposeful, connected, and capable. When employees experience happiness, they don't need to be pushed, they want to perform. By the end of this chapter, Achor makes a powerful promise to the listener. If you learn to apply the happiness advantage in your own work, whether you're leading a team, running a business, or simply managing your day-to-day tasks, you will not only achieve more, but also enjoy the process. You'll experience greater energy, better relationships, and higher creativity. Your work will stop feeling like a grind and start feeling like a flow, a state where productivity and joy merge into one powerful force. This chapter's results are clear, measurable, and inspiring. Happiness training works across cultures, across professions, and across challenges. It's not about pretending problems don't exist. It's about building a brain that performs at its best even in the face of those problems. The big takeaway here is that happiness is not a soft skill. It's a hard advantage. So, as Chapter 2 closes, Achor leaves us with an empowering thought. Happiness at work is not a dream or a myth. It's a proven science. You can train your brain to be more positive, and in doing so, you can completely transform how you experience your career, your relationships, and your life. When you understand that happiness fuels success, not the other way around, you stop chasing joy and start creating it. And that's the real power of the happiness advantage at work, a mindset that not only changes how you work, but changes how you live. Because when your brain is positive, your world expands, your energy multiplies, and your potential becomes limitless. Chapter 3. Change is Possible, a chapter that serves as the bridge between understanding the power of happiness and learning how to truly create it. If the first 2 chapters of the Happiness Advantage showed us why happiness fuels success and how it transforms performance at work, this chapter delivers an even deeper revelation. The scientific proof that lasting, positive change is not just a dream or a motivational slogan, but a biological reality. Shawn Achor opens this chapter with one powerful message. No matter who you are, where you work, or what your past looks like, your brain has the incredible ability to change. And when you change your brain, you change your entire life. Achor begins with a fascinating behavioral riddle. He asks the listener to imagine being trapped in a cage, where the only way to survive is to learn how to grab tiny pellets of food from small holes outside the bars. At first, it seems impossible, but over time, after hundreds of attempts, you get faster, better, and more efficient. The secret? Your brain itself begins to change. This, he explains, isn't just a story. It's based on a real scientific experiment with squirrel monkeys. Researchers found that as the monkeys practiced reaching for food, the part of their brain responsible for that movement expanded. Their brains literally rewired themselves through repetition and effort. This sets the stage for one of Achor's most important ideas, the concept of neuroplasticity. For decades, scientists believed that after adolescence, the human brain was fixed, its structure and abilities set in stone. People were told they were born with a certain level of intelligence, a fixed personality, and limited potential for change. Phrases like, "You can't teach an old dog new tricks," or "I'm just wired this way," became part of everyday language. But Achor, drawing on modern neuroscience, completely dismantles that myth. He explains that the human brain is malleable. It can grow new neural connections, strengthen positive habits, and weaken negative ones, no matter your age or background. He tells the captivating story of the okapi, a mysterious animal that looks like a cross between a zebra and a giraffe. For centuries, scientists dismissed stories of its existence as myth, an African unicorn. But in the early 20th century, explorers finally discovered that the okapi was real. Achor uses this metaphor to describe how, for years, Western science ignored the idea of brain change until undeniable evidence appeared. In the 1970s and beyond, breakthroughs in neuroscience revealed that neuroplasticity was not only possible, but happening all the time. Achor brings this idea to life with striking real-world examples. He cites research on London taxi drivers, who must memorize thousands of winding streets and landmarks to pass a famously difficult navigation test known as the knowledge. When scientists studied their brains, they discovered that the drivers had significantly larger hippocampi, the brain region responsible for spatial memory, than the average person. Their brains had physically adapted to their job. Similarly, when researchers studied blind individuals who learned to read Braille, they found that the part of the brain controlling the reading finger grew dramatically larger. These stories prove something astonishing. The brain changes in direct response to how we live our lives. With these examples, Achor drives home a revolutionary promise. Change is not only possible, it's inevitable if we choose to direct it. Every time we learn a new skill, practice gratitude, or shift our mindset toward optimism, we're not just thinking differently. We're rewiring the neural pathways that define our behavior. This scientific truth forms the foundation of the happiness advantage. We can literally train our brains to be happier, more resilient, and more successful. He connects this idea to the world of personal development and motivation. For so long, people believed success was reserved for a lucky few, the naturally talented, the confident, the born optimists. But neuroscience destroys that notion. With focused effort and consistent habits, anyone can build the neural architecture of success. Achor compares this process to training a muscle. Just as physical exercise strengthens your body, mental exercise, such as practicing positivity, mindfulness, or gratitude, strengthens your brain's capacity for happiness and achievement. Achor then introduces another powerful concept, the difference between possible and probable. He explains this through the legendary story of Roger Bannister, the British runner who, in 1954, broke the seemingly impossible 4-minute mile barrier. For years, experts claimed that it was physiologically impossible for the human body to achieve this. But once Bannister proved it could be done, something remarkable happened. Within a year, several other runners broke the same record. The belief that it was possible made it probable. Similarly, once we believe our brains can change, real transformation becomes not only achievable, but inevitable. This is one of the biggest promises of the chapter, that the limits we think we have are not real, they are learned. They exist in our minds, not in our biology. And once we reframe our mindset from "I can't change" to "change is happening every day," we unleash our true potential. This is the moment where Achor bridges science with empowerment, turning a complex neurological discovery into a life-changing truth for anyone who feels stuck, overwhelmed, or uninspired. He then addresses a question many people ask: can happiness training really last? Can a few positive exercises actually make a long-term difference? To answer this, Achor describes his follow-up study with KPMG, where he had previously taught employees the principles of positive psychology. For months after the training, long after the initial excitement should have worn off, the results still held strong. The participants remained happier, less stressed, and more productive than before. This proved that small, intentional practices could lead to sustainable positive change in both attitude and performance. But Achor also delivers an honest warning. Knowledge alone is not transformation. He tells the story of a sleep researcher who discovered that sleep slows aging. But the irony was, the researcher himself never slept, because he spent his nights studying others. The lesson? Knowing what to do is useless unless you actually do it. Real change requires action, consistency, and commitment. Positive change is a choice we must practice daily, not a one-time realization. In the closing pages of this chapter, Achor shares a personal story. After years of nonstop travel and overwork, he suffered a severe back injury that forced him to stop and reevaluate his life. During his recovery, he finally practiced the very principles he had been teaching others: gratitude, rest, connection, and mindfulness, and experienced firsthand how applying positive psychology could transform not only his outlook, but his healing. This personal moment makes the science deeply human, reminding listeners that even the happiest, most motivated people can fall, and that the real measure of growth is how we rise again. By the end of change is possible, the message is electrifying. Your brain is not a prisoner of your past. It's a tool for your future. Every thought, every action, every habit is a signal that shapes who you become. Happiness is not something that happens to you. It's something you build, one neural connection at a time. The big promise of this chapter is that you are not limited by your genes, your upbringing, or your circumstances. You can transform your mindset, your habits, and your life by training your brain toward positivity. The result is lasting change, a happier, stronger, more resilient version of yourself, capable of thriving in any situation. So, as you finish this chapter, remember Shawn Achor's fundamental truth. Happiness is not the belief that you don't need to change. It's the realization that you can. Once you accept that your brain can evolve, every challenge becomes a chance to grow, every setback becomes a lesson, and every day becomes a new opportunity to become the best version of yourself. Because change is not only possible, it's already happening. The only question is, are you ready to shape it? Welcome to Chapter 4, Principle 1, The Happiness Advantage, the very heart of Shawn Achor's groundbreaking philosophy and the cornerstone on which the entire book is built. In this chapter, Achor invites us to take a revolutionary leap, a mindset shift so profound that it challenges one of the oldest beliefs in Western culture, that success leads to happiness. For generations, we've been told that if we work hard, achieve our goals, and climb the ladder of success, then we'll finally be happy. But what if the equation runs the other way around? What if happiness is not the result of success, but the cause of it? This is the bold promise of the first and most important principle in the book. Happiness gives your brain and your life a measurable competitive advantage. Achor begins the chapter with a powerful metaphor drawn from history. The story of Nicholas Copernicus, the 16th century astronomer who shattered humanity's long-held belief that the Earth was the center of the universe. Just as Copernicus proved that the Earth actually revolves around the Sun, Achor argues that we've misunderstood the orbit of success and happiness. For too long, we've believed that success is the center and happiness revolves around it. But modern science proves the opposite. Happiness is the center and success revolves around it. When we start with happiness, everything else, productivity, creativity, motivation, energy, and achievement, naturally follows. This realization isn't based on wishful thinking or motivational cliches. It's backed by decades of empirical research in positive psychology and neuroscience. Achor draws from more than 200 scientific studies conducted on over 275,000 people across the world, and the data is crystal clear. Happiness precedes success in almost every area of life. People who are happier are more likely to earn higher salaries, enjoy better health, form stronger relationships, and perform better at work. They're not happy because they're successful. They're successful because they're happy. Achor takes us into the workplace to show how this principle plays out in real life. He explains that when we're happy, our brains release dopamine and serotonin, two powerful neurotransmitters that not only make us feel good, but also enhance our cognitive abilities. They increase focus, creativity, and problem-solving skills while improving our ability to make decisions and adapt under pressure. In other words, a positive brain is literally more efficient, more intelligent, and more productive than a neutral or negative one. He refers to this neurological edge as the happiness advantage, a real and measurable performance boost that affects every area of our personal and professional lives. The research shows that happy salespeople outsell their unhappy peers by more than 56%. Happy doctors make accurate diagnoses 19% faster. Students primed to feel positive before an exam outperform their neutral peers. Even teams led by optimistic leaders are more productive, creative, and cohesive. The science is overwhelming. Happiness is not just a mood, it's a competitive edge. Achor then dismantles the if-then model of happiness, the belief that we'll be happy if we achieve something, if we get promoted, if we make more money, or if we hit the next milestone. The problem with this formula, he explains, is that every time we succeed, our brain moves the goalpost. We get the raise, then immediately start thinking about the next one. We finish the project and immediately look toward the next challenge. This constant pursuit creates a happiness deficit, where joy is always just one achievement away. The happiness advantage flips this equation. Instead of waiting to be happy after success, Achor teaches us to generate happiness first, so that success becomes easier, faster, and more sustainable. He illustrates this through studies on long-term happiness and performance. One famous experiment he shares involves a group of Catholic nuns who were asked to write brief autobiographies at the age of 22. Decades later, researchers analyzed the emotional tone of those writings and discovered that the nuns who expressed more positive emotions in their early years lived, on average, 10 years longer than those who didn't. By age 85, 90% of the happiest nuns were still alive, compared to only 34% of the least happy. Their happiness didn't come from success. Their success and longevity came from happiness. This leads to one of the most profound insights in the chapter. Happiness is not about ignoring reality or pretending everything is perfect. It's about creating the mental conditions that allow us to perform at our best, even when life isn't perfect. Achor is careful to clarify that the happiness advantage isn't about blind optimism or fake positivity. It's not about smiling through pain or denying problems. Instead, it's about training your brain to focus on opportunities rather than obstacles, solutions rather than setbacks. It's about cultivating a mindset that allows you to thrive, not just survive. Achor also introduces the listener to the concept of psychological priming. He explains that when people are exposed to positive images, words, or emotions before a task, their performance improves dramatically. For instance, doctors who were given candy before diagnosing a case, not even to eat, just to hold, made their diagnoses faster and more accurately. This shows that our mindset can be shaped in moments, and small doses of positivity can trigger measurable improvements in our brain's performance. Imagine what could happen if we learned to do this intentionally every day. To make this practical, Achor begins to hint at tools that will be explored in later chapters. Simple, daily habits that can activate the happiness advantage, such as gratitude journaling, exercise, meditation, and connecting with others. These practices, he explains, don't just make you feel good in the moment. They physically rewire your brain for optimism and resilience. Over time, they shift your baseline happiness upward, meaning you start from a higher state of well-being every day, no matter what challenges arise. The big promise of this chapter is clear and compelling. When you train your brain to be positive, you gain a biological advantage that transforms every aspect of your performance. You become more productive at work, more creative in solving problems, more motivated to pursue goals, more connected in your relationships, and more resilient in the face of stress. This isn't theory, it's proven science. Happiness doesn't just change how you feel, it changes how your brain operates. By the end of the chapter, Achor delivers a challenge to the listener, a call to action that feels both empowering and urgent. Stop waiting for happiness to arrive after success. Don't make joy the finish line of your journey. Make it the starting point. The greatest minds, the most innovative thinkers, and the most successful leaders all share one trait. They've learned to harness positivity as a tool, not a reward. So, as this chapter closes, the takeaway is undeniable. Happiness is not a luxury. It's a strategy, the most powerful performance enhancer on the planet. When your brain is positive, your potential expands. You become more adaptable, more focused, and more capable of turning challenges into opportunities. The happiness advantage isn't about escaping reality. It's about transforming it from within. Because when you start with happiness, success doesn't just happen by chance. It becomes a natural outcome. That's the real advantage. And once you understand this principle, every goal you pursue, every obstacle you face, and every day you live becomes part of a larger truth. That happiness isn't the reward for success. It's the foundation that makes success inevitable. Chapter 5. Principle 2. The Fulcrum and the Lever. One of the most transformative chapters in Shawn Achor's The Happiness Advantage, where science meets mindset and mindset meets real-world results. This principle takes us beyond the discovery that happiness fuels success and dives into the mechanics of how we can change our perspective to completely reshape our outcomes in work, relationships, and life. In this chapter, Achor gives us a powerful truth. It's not our reality that shapes us, but the lens through which we view that reality. The way we interpret the world determines how we experience it, and by shifting that interpretation, we gain the power to move the world around us. The title of this chapter, The Fulcrum and the Lever, comes straight from the ancient wisdom of Archimedes, the great Greek mathematician and physicist. Archimedes once said, "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I can move the world." Achor brilliantly uses this metaphor to describe how our mindset functions in our daily lives. The lever represents our power, our potential to create change, while the fulcrum represents the mindset or belief system we rest that lever on. In other words, If we can move the fulcrum, if we can shift our mindset, we can move our entire world. This idea forms the backbone of the second principle and is one of the most practical tools for creating lasting positive change. Achor begins by illustrating how two people can experience the exact same situation but have completely different emotional responses. One might see a challenge as a threat, the other might see it as an opportunity. The situation doesn't change, but the interpretation does. He calls this cognitive framing, the mental process through which we construct meaning from our experiences. Positive psychology teaches us that our brains are meaning-making machines, and we have the choice to frame our reality in ways that empower or weaken us. This isn't about pretending everything is great. It's about choosing a perspective that helps us move forward rather than hold us back. He tells the story of a young man named Peter, a Harvard student who was overwhelmed by the pressure of grades, competition, and comparison. Peter saw Harvard not as a gift, but as a constant reminder of his inadequacies. Achor helped him reframe his experience by shifting his mental fulcrum, encouraging him to see Harvard as an opportunity for growth rather than a judgment of his worth. The change didn't alter Peter's workload or the difficulty of his environment, but it completely transformed his relationship with it. Within weeks, his stress decreased, his confidence improved, and his performance rose dramatically. That's the magic of mindset. When we change the way we see, we change the way we perform. Achor then introduces one of the most compelling scientific findings supporting this principle, the placebo effect. In medicine, patients who believe they are receiving treatment often experience real physiological improvements, even if the treatment is just a sugar pill. Their mindset alone triggers measurable healing responses in the body, lower stress hormones, reduced pain, and improved immune function. This phenomenon reveals the immense power of belief, the mental lever that changes physical reality. The same power applies outside of medicine. Our beliefs about our abilities, intelligence, and potential directly affect our performance. He expands this concept through the famous Harvard hotel study. Researchers studied hotel maids who spent their days cleaning rooms, changing sheets, and pushing heavy carts. Physically, they were getting more exercise than most people at the gym, yet many reported feeling unhealthy and overweight. Scientists told half the group that their work actually met or exceeded the Surgeon General's recommendations for daily exercise. Within 4 weeks, those maids lost weight, lowered their blood pressure, and reported feeling more energetic, without changing anything about their routine. Their belief that they were doing something healthy created real, biological change. The study's takeaway is profound. When you change your mindset about what you're doing, you change the results of what you're doing. Achor refers to this as the power of the fulcrum. Our mindset determines where we place that fulcrum, the point of leverage, in our lives. When we believe our intelligence, creativity, or potential are fixed, our lever is short and weak. We can barely move anything. But when we believe in our capacity to grow, learn, and adapt, when we embrace what psychologist Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset, our lever lengthens, and suddenly we can move mountains. This shift from a fixed to a growth mindset is at the heart of the happiness advantage. He brings this principle to life through the story of MetLife Insurance, where Achor worked with the legendary psychologist Martin Seligman. Seligman discovered that optimism was the single best predictor of sales success. In one experiment, he helped MetLife hire not just for experience or IQ, but for optimism, the belief that setbacks were temporary and controllable. Within 2 years, the optimistic salespeople outperformed their pessimistic peers by 57% in sales. Their fulcrum had shifted. They didn't change their environment. They changed how they interpreted it. Achor also explores how our beliefs shape our self-fulfilling prophecies. When we believe we're capable, our brain seeks evidence to confirm it. When we believe we're doomed to fail, our brain seeks proof of that too. This is why reframing challenges is so powerful. It redirects our brain's focus toward solutions and opportunities. He emphasizes that we all have the ability to choose our mindset every day. Whether we interpret a tough situation as a burden or a blessing, a problem or a puzzle, is entirely up to us, and that choice determines our emotional and physical energy. Another fascinating example comes from the military. Achor describes how the U.S. Army began applying positive psychology to build resilience among soldiers. By teaching soldiers to reframe adversity, to view trauma not as permanent damage but as an opportunity for growth, they dramatically reduced rates of PTSD and increased recovery after deployment. Once again, it wasn't the circumstances that changed, but the fulcrum, the mental frame that determined how the soldiers experienced those circumstances. The big promise of this chapter is both simple and profound. You have the power to change your world by changing the way you see it. You can't always control your external circumstances, but you can control your internal interpretation, and that interpretation determines your success, health, and happiness. When you shift your mindset toward positivity, your energy increases, your motivation strengthens, and your performance improves across every area of life. By the end of the fulcrum and the lever, Shawn Achor leaves us with a call to action, to consciously move our mental fulcrum toward empowerment. Start believing that challenges can be overcome, that failures can lead to growth, and that effort leads to improvement. When we adjust our mindset in this way, we lengthen our lever and multiply our power. In essence, this principle teaches us that happiness and success are not about changing the world. They're about changing how we see the world. The more we learn to control our perspective, the more control we gain over our outcomes. It's not about false positivity. It's about intelligent optimism, the kind that fuels creativity, resilience, and action. So, as this chapter closes, remember this. You don't need to move the world to be happy. You just need to move your fulcrum. Because once you do, you'll discover that the real lever of change was never outside of you. It's been in your mind all along. And that's the true power of the fulcrum and the lever. The ability to turn the simple act of shifting perspective into the extraordinary act of transforming your life. Chapter 6, Principle 3, The Tetris Effect, one of the most fascinating and visually unforgettable lessons in the happiness advantage. In this chapter, Shawn Achor takes us deep inside the workings of the human brain to reveal a powerful truth. What we spend our time focusing on shapes the way we see the world. The title of this chapter comes from a famous psychological phenomenon inspired by the classic video game Tetris. After playing the game for hours, players began to see Tetris shapes, the L's, T's, and Z's, everywhere in real life, on buildings, boxes, sidewalks, and even in their dreams. Their brains had become trained, through repetition, to scan for those patterns automatically. Achor uses this example to explain that our minds work the same way. We become what we repeatedly think about. If we constantly focus on problems, flaws, and failures, our brains will filter the world to see more of them. But if we train our brains to look for opportunities, gratitude, and success, we'll start seeing those instead. This is the Tetris effect, the science of how our patterns of perception determine our reality. Achor begins the chapter by describing how this idea emerged not in a laboratory, but in everyday life. Psychologists first noticed the Tetris effect in college students who played the game obsessively for hours each day. Even when they stopped playing, their minds kept running in Tetris mode, searching for geometric patterns everywhere they went. This effect fascinated researchers because it proved that the brain doesn't just process information, it adapts to what it repeatedly does. In other words, our thoughts, like muscles, can be trained through repetition. And just as gamers train their brains to see Tetris shapes, we train ours to see patterns of failure, frustration, or success, depending on what we pay attention to. He then connects this to our professional and personal lives. Imagine a tax auditor, a lawyer, or a risk manager, jobs that require finding errors, risks, or potential problems every day. Over time, their brains become wired to detect what's wrong, not what's right. They might become experts at identifying mistakes at work, but that same skill spills over into their personal lives, making them more likely to spot what's missing in their relationships or what's broken in their world. The result? They become trapped in a negative Tetris effect, constantly scanning for flaws, threats, and complaints. Their brains literally forget how to see the good. Achor explains that this isn't a character flaw, it's biology. Our brains have a negativity bias, an evolutionary trait designed to keep us safe from danger. But in the modern world, where we're not running from predators, this bias can sabotage our happiness and limit our potential. The good news, and the big promise of this chapter, is that just as we can train our brains to see the negative, we can retrain them to see the positive. This shift doesn't mean ignoring problems or pretending everything is fine. It means consciously refocusing our attention on patterns of possibility, opportunity, and gratitude. When we do that consistently, we unlock what Achor calls the positive Tetris effect, a mindset where our brains naturally scan the world for ideas, people, and possibilities that fuel growth and success. Achor supports this idea with compelling scientific evidence. He cites research from the field of cognitive psychology showing that what we focus on expands in our awareness. If we focus on stress, we experience more stress. If we focus on gratitude, we begin to notice more things to be grateful for. One famous experiment asked participants to keep a daily journal of 3 good things that happened to them each day. After just 21 days, participants were significantly happier, more optimistic, and less depressed, and the benefits lasted for months after the study ended. This simple habit retrained their brains to look for the positive, strengthening the neural pathways associated with optimism and resilience. Achor also references research from Sonia Lyabomirsky, a leading happiness scientist, who found that people who regularly practice gratitude not only report higher levels of happiness, but also enjoy better health, stronger relationships, and even longer lifespans. This reinforces a key insight. Happiness isn't just an emotion, it's a habit. And like any habit, it can be cultivated through intentional practice. He brings this to life with powerful real-world stories. In one, he describes working with KPMG, a global accounting firm known for its high-pressure environment. During tax season, stress was at its peak, and employees were burning out. Achor introduced a short daily exercise, asking employees to write down 3 positive experiences or things they were grateful for each day. Within just a few weeks, stress levels dropped dramatically, productivity rose, and overall happiness increased. The positive Tetris effect had begun to take hold. The exercise didn't remove the workload or change deadlines. It simply changed what people focused on. And that shift completely transformed how they experienced their work. Achor also points to research from Harvard Medical School showing that people who cultivate positive scanning habits, like gratitude, optimism, and appreciation, perform better in nearly every measurable domain. Their immune systems are stronger, their creativity higher, and their relationships deeper. When we train our brains to see positive patterns, we literally change the chemistry of our minds, increasing dopamine, reducing cortisol, and rewiring our neural circuits for resilience. The Tetris effect also explains why some people always seem lucky. These are the individuals who consistently notice small chances, coincidences, and opportunities that others overlook. But as Achor explains, luck isn't magic, it's mindset. When you prime your brain to scan for opportunities, you become more aware of them, more likely to act on them, and more likely to create positive outcomes. In other words, lucky people simply have a stronger positive Tetris effect. They see doors where others see walls. But perhaps the most profound lesson in this chapter is that the Tetris effect doesn't just affect individuals. It spreads through teams, families, and organizations. Achor describes how, in workplaces that emphasize recognition, gratitude, and positive feedback, employees become more collaborative, more innovative, and more motivated. The opposite is also true. In environments where negativity dominates, creativity plummets, turnover rises, and burnout spreads like wildfire. The way we train our minds affects not just our own happiness, but the energy of those around us. By the end of the chapter, Achor provides practical tools for cultivating the positive Tetris effect in your own life. He recommends starting small, with daily gratitude journaling, positive reflection, or success scanning, where you deliberately notice and record moments of progress, joy, or kindness. Over time, these habits shift the brain's default mode from focusing on threats to focusing on possibilities. It's not about ignoring problems. It's about strengthening your ability to see solutions. The big promise of this chapter is that by mastering the positive Tetris effect, you can completely reshape your reality. You'll find yourself noticing opportunities that were always there, but invisible before. You'll build deeper relationships because your mind will naturally look for what's good in people rather than what's wrong. You'll feel more motivated, more resilient, and more creative because your brain will be primed for possibility instead of danger. Shawn Achor ends the chapter with a powerful reminder. The lens through which you view the world is a choice. You can choose to see obstacles or opportunities, stress or strength, scarcity or abundance. The brain's filter can be trained, and once you train it to focus on the positive, your world expands. So, as this chapter closes, the message is both scientific and spiritual. Your brain is always scanning the horizon for patterns. Make sure it's scanning for the right ones. Because when you learn to see the world through the lens of possibility, you don't just change what you notice, you change what you attract, what you achieve, and how you live. That is the true power of the Tetris effect, the ability to program your mind to see opportunity in every moment and happiness in every corner of your life. Chapter 7, Principle Number 4, Falling Up, one of the most inspiring and transformative chapters in the Happiness Advantage. This is where Shawn Achor explores one of the greatest truths in psychology, performance, and life. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's the foundation of it. In this chapter, Achor teaches us how to fall up, how to rise from adversity stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. Instead of letting setbacks define us or drag us down, we can use them as stepping stones that propel us higher. This principle isn't just about optimism. It's about scientifically proven ways to turn trauma, challenge, and defeat into growth and strength. Achor begins by taking us back to his days at Harvard, where he taught positive psychology to students who seemed to have everything: intelligence, ambition, and opportunity, yet struggled deeply when they failed. For many of them, one bad grade or rejection letter shattered their confidence because they had never learned how to process failure constructively. They believed that success was linear, that any deviation from perfection meant weakness. But Achor discovered that those who thrived, not just survived, in these high-pressure environments were the ones who learned to reframe failure, to see it not as a dead end, but as a detour leading to growth. That is the essence of falling up. He supports this idea with compelling research from the field of post-traumatic growth, a term coined by psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun. Their studies revealed that after experiencing trauma, many people don't just recover, they actually grow stronger, reporting greater appreciation for life, deeper relationships, increased personal strength, and renewed purpose. In fact, over 90% of trauma survivors report at least one positive change after tragedy. This challenges the traditional notion that adversity always damages us. In reality, it can awaken hidden capacities for courage, empathy, and innovation. Achor calls this the third path. He explains that when we experience failure or trauma, we generally face three possible outcomes. The first path leads downward. We stay stuck, trapped in negativity and helplessness. The second path returns us to where we started. We recover, but don't grow. But the third path, the one Achor calls falling up, propels us forward to a place even better than where we began. People who fall up don't deny their pain. They transform it into purpose. They ask not why me, but what can I learn from this? How can this make me stronger? To bring this idea to life, Achor shares powerful real-world examples. One of the most striking comes from the 9/11 attacks. In the aftermath of unimaginable tragedy, researchers found that people who focused on connection, gratitude, and helping others showed faster psychological recovery and higher levels of happiness than those who isolated themselves. Their ability to fall up came from reframing the event, choosing to see meaning amid loss, and to rebuild stronger communities. Similarly, Achor recounts stories of war veterans who, after injury or trauma, discovered new purpose, becoming mentors, advocates, or entrepreneurs. Their pain became the very fuel for their success. He also illustrates how this principle applies in everyday life. Whether it's losing a job, facing a breakup, or missing a major goal, our response determines the outcome. People who see setbacks as permanent and personal fall into what psychologists call learned helplessness, the belief that their actions no longer matter. But those who cultivate optimism and a growth mindset activate a completely different psychological pattern. Their brains produce dopamine and serotonin, chemicals that enhance motivation and problem solving, allowing them to adapt quickly and bounce back stronger. Achor's research shows that people who adopt this mindset perform 23% better under stress, have higher resilience, and are significantly less likely to suffer from depression. The heart of falling up lies in reframing, the conscious act of changing the narrative we tell ourselves about failure. Achor explains that when something goes wrong, our brain creates a story about it. That story determines our emotional reaction and our next move. If we tell ourselves, "I failed because I'm not good enough," we shut down. But if we say, "I failed because I took a risk and now I know how to do it better," we open ourselves to growth. This is not toxic positivity. It's cognitive restructuring, a process backed by decades of psychological research showing that our thoughts shape our outcomes. Achor demonstrates how to practice reframing through a simple, actionable process. First, acknowledge the challenge honestly. Don't deny or sugarcoat it. Second, look for one lesson or opportunity embedded in the experience. Third, take small, constructive actions that move you forward. These steps transform adversity from an emotional weight into an intellectual and motivational resource. Over time, this mindset becomes automatic. Your brain learns to default to growth rather than defeat. One of the most memorable examples in this chapter is Achor's story of a friend who lost his job during the 2008 financial crisis. At first, he was crushed, believing his career was over. But instead of staying stuck, he used the setback as a chance to pursue work that aligned with his values. Within months, he started a nonprofit that ended up helping thousands of people, a success that would never have happened without the initial failure. This, Achor says, is the perfect embodiment of falling up. The big promise of this chapter is that adversity is not the end of happiness, it's often the beginning. Every failure, every setback, every heartbreak carries within it the seed of greater success and deeper meaning. The difference lies in perception. When we see failure as an opportunity to learn, we build resilience. When we interpret pain as temporary and specific rather than permanent and personal, we regain control. When we connect with others, share our struggles, and focus on growth, we rise higher than before. Achor closes the chapter by reminding us that falling up isn't about avoiding pain. It's about mastering the comeback. The people who rise the fastest are those who face challenges head-on and rewrite their stories from victimhood to victory. Life will always bring obstacles, but happiness gives us the resilience to transform those obstacles into stepping stones. So as you finish this chapter, remember, success isn't defined by how high you climb, but by how powerfully you bounce back when you fall. Every setback is an invitation to rise stronger, wiser, and more grateful. That's the essence of falling up, the art of transforming failure into fuel and adversity into advantage. And that's the secret Shawn Achor leaves us with. Happiness isn't about avoiding life's lows. It's about using them to climb even higher. Because when you learn to fall up, no fall can ever truly hold you down. Welcome to Chapter 7, Principle 5, the Zorro Circle, one of the most transformative and psychologically insightful chapters in Shawn Achor's The Happiness Advantage. This chapter reveals a life-changing principle built around a single, powerful idea. When life feels out of control, the secret to regaining balance, focus, and confidence lies in starting small. Achor calls this principle the Zorro Circle, inspired by the legendary masked hero who learned that true power doesn't come from trying to conquer the entire world at once. It comes from mastering one small circle at a time. This principle is about how we reclaim control when we feel overwhelmed, how we rebuild confidence when life knocks us down, and how focusing on what we can control creates the momentum to change everything else. Achor begins with the origin story of Zorro, not the Hollywood version of the fearless sword fighter, but the one from the original Mark of Zorro tale. In his early days, young Zorro was impulsive, reckless, and constantly defeated because he tried to take on too much at once. Seeing his frustration, his wise mentor, Don Diego, drew a small circle in the dirt and told Zorro that he could not step outside of it until he had mastered everything within that circle. His sword movements, his breathing, his focus, his control. Only when Zorro proved mastery within that small space could he expand his circle wider, little by little, until he eventually became the unstoppable hero we know today. Achor uses this story as a metaphor for how we can take back control over our lives. When we try to tackle everything, stress, work, relationships, money, all at once, we become overwhelmed and paralyzed. But when we narrow our focus to what we can control, even if it's small, we regain our power, confidence, and clarity. He connects this lesson to the modern workplace and to life itself by explaining how loss of control is one of the greatest predictors of stress and burnout. Decades of research in psychology, particularly studies on what's known as learned helplessness, show that when people feel they have no control over their circumstances, their motivation collapses. They stop trying, even when opportunities to improve appear. This was first observed in animals, but later studies revealed the same pattern in humans. People who feel powerless over time begin to disengage, lose confidence, and spiral into negativity. Achor argues that the antidote to this destructive pattern isn't to suddenly take control of everything. It's to start by mastering something small. He shares the story of one of his clients, a corporate executive named Caroline, who was overwhelmed by her workload, team conflicts, and personal challenges. Every morning, she woke up already anxious, feeling that she was failing on all fronts. Through coaching, Achor encouraged her to create her own Zorro Circle, a small, defined area she could manage and control. For her, that started with simply taking control of the first 30 minutes of her day, turning off her phone, organizing her priorities, and setting a calm tone before diving into work chaos. That single act of control began to ripple outward. Within weeks, her anxiety decreased, her focus improved, and her productivity soared. This is the essence of the Zorro Circle. Small control creates big confidence. Achor supports this idea with neuroscience. When we experience a sense of control, our brains release dopamine, a chemical associated with motivation and learning. This release boosts our mood and helps the brain engage its higher-order functions, like problem-solving, creativity, and emotional regulation. On the other hand, when we feel powerless, our brains flood with cortisol, the stress hormone that shuts down these same functions. So, by focusing on small areas we can manage, even something as simple as organizing a desk, completing a small project, or having a productive conversation, we activate a virtuous cycle. Success fuels confidence, and confidence fuels greater control. Achor ties this to a key insight from positive psychology, that happiness and success don't come from controlling everything, but from controlling what matters most. He calls this the circle of control expansion. It's a step-by-step process. First, identify one manageable area of focus. Then, master it completely. Once you do, your confidence expands, and you can take on the next circle, a slightly larger challenge. Over time, this builds a powerful upward spiral of growth. Instead of feeling crushed by life's chaos, you become a person who can navigate complexity with composure. He also illustrates the opposite effect. What happens when we let our circles collapse? Many people, he explains, react to failure by trying to take on more, pushing harder, multitasking, or overcommitting, which only amplifies stress and reduces performance. The key is not to do more, but to regain control over less. Achor reminds us that even the smallest victories, finishing one important task, taking one meaningful action, or saying no to one unnecessary obligation, can reignite our sense of agency and momentum. To reinforce this, he references a famous study on locus of control conducted by psychologist Julian Rotter. The research found that people with an internal locus of control, those who believe they have power over their own actions and outcomes, tend to be happier, healthier, and more successful than those with an external locus of control who attribute everything to luck, fate, or external forces. The difference isn't in circumstance, but in perception. The Zorro Circle helps us strengthen our internal locus of control by giving us direct evidence that our actions matter. Every time we succeed within our small circle, our brain learns that we have influence, and that belief compounds into real-world power. Achor also shares his own experiences applying this principle in his teaching and consulting work. When he worked with overwhelmed teams at companies like UBS and American Express during financial downturns, he found that asking people to focus on fixing everything was paralyzing. But asking them to fix one thing, a single client relationship, one communication process, one personal habit, sparked energy, optimism, and teamwork. Once people saw progress within that small circle, they naturally expanded their focus outward, improving more areas in less time than if they had tried to fix everything at once. The big promise of this chapter is as practical as it is empowering. When you feel overwhelmed, the fastest way to regain control is to shrink your focus. It's not about giving up or thinking small. It's about building mastery and momentum from the inside out. Success is not achieved by fighting every battle at once, but by winning one manageable battle and expanding from there. This approach not only reduces stress, but builds resilience, confidence, and sustained motivation. By the end of the Zorro Circle, Achor leaves listeners with a strategy they can apply instantly. Whenever you feel trapped or powerless, pause and draw your own mental circle. Identify one thing you can control right now, one habit, one task, one behavior, and master it completely. That act will spark the chemistry of confidence and create a ripple effect of empowerment that spreads across every area of your life. The result? You stop feeling like life is happening to you and start realizing that life is happening through you. You become proactive rather than reactive, composed rather than chaotic, empowered rather than overwhelmed. So, as this chapter closes, remember this. You don't have to conquer the world in one day, just your circle. Because once you master what's inside that circle, the world outside begins to shift in your favor. This is the promise and power of the Zorro Circle, the art of reclaiming control, one small victory at a time. until your circles of mastery expand into a life of confidence, purpose, and unstoppable happiness. Chapter 8. Principle 6. The 20-second rule, one of the most practical, relatable, and downright life-changing lessons in Shawn Achor's The Happiness Advantage. If the earlier chapters have shown us how happiness fuels success and how mindset shapes our perception, this chapter shows us how to make happiness and success habitual. It's about understanding that real transformation doesn't depend on motivation alone. It depends on designing your environment so that good habits are easy and bad habits are hard. The 20-second rule is Achor's simple, science-backed formula for making lasting change in your daily life by hacking the brain's natural resistance to effort and energy. Achor opens the chapter with a confession that instantly draws listeners in. He, too, struggled with following through on his good intentions. He describes a time when, after long days of work and travel, he would tell himself he was going to come home, practice guitar, exercise, or read, but instead he'd collapse on the couch and reach for the TV remote. He wasn't lazy or unmotivated. He simply found it easier to default to the path of least resistance. That's when it hit him. Energy is the currency of behavior. We don't just make choices based on desire. We make them based on convenience. The easier a behavior is to start, the more likely we are to do it. The harder it is to begin, even by a few seconds, the more likely we are to avoid it. This insight became the foundation of the 20-second rule, the idea that by reducing the amount of effort it takes to start a positive habit by just 20 seconds, we can dramatically increase the likelihood of doing it. Conversely, by adding just 20 seconds of friction to a bad habit, we can make it much easier to avoid. Achor calls this principle a shortcut to success, a behavioral design trick that uses our brain's natural tendencies to our advantage instead of fighting against them. To illustrate, he tells the story of how he finally succeeded in building the habit of playing guitar. For weeks, he had promised himself he would practice, but his guitar sat in the closet while the TV remote sat within arm's reach. So he decided to flip the setup. He took the batteries out of the remote and put them in another room, and he placed his guitar right in the middle of his living room. The next evening, when he sat on the couch, the choice was effortless. Instead of spending energy getting up to find the remote, he picked up the guitar that was right in front of him. Within days, what used to be a struggle became automatic. That small, 20-second change removed the friction from a positive habit and added friction to a negative one. The result? A daily habit that stuck. Achor explains that this principle is rooted in behavioral psychology and the science of activation energy, a concept borrowed from chemistry. Just as a chemical reaction requires a certain amount of energy to get started, so does a behavioral reaction. For example, getting up early to work out requires energy to get out of bed, put on shoes, and head to the gym. The more steps or energy barriers between you and the behavior, the less likely you are to do it. But when you lower that activation energy, you make it easier for your brain to choose the right action automatically. He connects this principle to the work of Roy Baumeister, a psychologist famous for studying willpower and decision fatigue. Baumeister's research revealed that willpower is like a muscle. It gets tired the more you use it. This means that relying on self-discipline alone is a losing strategy for long-term success. If your good habits require constant willpower, they'll eventually collapse under the weight of exhaustion and stress. The 20-second rule, however, bypasses willpower entirely by redesigning your environment to make the right choices the easy ones. Achor offers several practical examples that demonstrate how small environmental tweaks can create massive results. For instance, if you want to start exercising in the morning, don't rely on motivation. Lay out your workout clothes and shoes the night before, right next to your bed. That 20-second reduction in effort might be the difference between hitting snooze and hitting the gym. If you want to read more, put a book on your pillow every morning so it's the first thing you see before bed. If you want to eat healthier, cut up fruits and vegetables in advance, and store them at eye level in the fridge. Conversely, if you want to watch less TV, remove the batteries from your remote or unplug your console so it takes extra effort to start. He also shares how he applied the 20-second rule to his professional life. When he found himself constantly distracted by email notifications, he created activation barriers. He signed out of his email app after work and made sure it took at least 20 seconds to log back in. That small delay gave his brain just enough time to reconsider whether checking email was really necessary. Over time, this change helped him reclaim hours of focus and productivity each week. Achor explains that these small behavioral hacks work because they align with how our brains evolved. The human brain is wired for efficiency. It constantly seeks the path of least resistance. That's why habits, both good and bad, are so powerful. Once a behavior becomes automatic, our brains conserve energy by running it on autopilot. The 20-second rule allows us to consciously engineer that autopilot by making small design changes that shift the balance of effort in our favor. He also connects this principle to the science of happiness and success. When positive behaviors become habitual, they no longer feel like chores. They become sources of joy and fulfillment. For example, when gratitude journaling or daily exercise becomes effortless, you begin to experience the compounding benefits of happiness: improved mood, higher energy, better relationships, and greater performance. Achor emphasizes that the true goal isn't just to create one good habit. It's to build a lifestyle that automatically supports happiness. The big promise of this chapter is simple but powerful. You don't need more motivation to change your life. You need less friction. You don't have to wait for the perfect moment or the perfect burst of energy. You just need to make your desired behaviors so easy to start that you can't help but do them. When you engineer your environment for success, change becomes natural, not forced. By the end of the 20-second rule, Achor leaves listeners with a profound sense of empowerment. You realize that your habits are not a reflection of your willpower, but of your design. If you want to change your outcomes, change your setup. Reduce the friction to good behaviors. Increase the friction to bad ones, and let your brain's natural wiring do the rest. Over time, these tiny adjustments create massive transformations in your health, happiness, relationships, and productivity. So as this chapter closes, remember this: success isn't about working harder. It's about working smarter and designing smarter. Every action you take is either a step toward the life you want or the life you want to leave behind. The 20-second rule teaches us how to make the right steps easier and the wrong ones harder, giving us the structure we need to make happiness not a goal, but a way of life. Because in the end, lasting happiness doesn't come from dramatic change. It comes from small, deliberate actions repeated every day. Actions that start not with willpower, but with a simple 20-second choice. Welcome to Chapter 9, Principle 7, Social Investment, one of the most heartfelt and transformational chapters in the Happiness Advantage. In this closing principle of Part 2, Shawn Achor delivers what he calls the most powerful predictor of happiness and success across every study in positive psychology: the strength of your social connections. This chapter isn't just about relationships in the emotional sense. It's about understanding that our connections to others are our single greatest source of resilience, performance, and well-being. If happiness gives us the advantage and mindset gives us control, then social investment gives us the fuel to sustain both. Achor opens the chapter with a striking story drawn from his research at Harvard. During exam periods, some of the most stressful times in a student's life, he noticed two types of behavior. Some students withdrew into isolation, closing themselves off to focus entirely on work. Others, while still working hard, made time to connect with friends, sharing coffee, taking walks, laughing, and leaning on each other for support. When the grades came back, it wasn't the isolated high achievers who performed best. It was the students who stayed socially connected. Their relationships buffered stress, sharpened focus, and boosted motivation. From that moment, Achor realized something profound. The people who invest in relationships during times of stress don't just survive, they thrive. He ties this discovery to a body of scientific evidence that spans decades. Studies from Harvard's Grant and Glueck longitudinal research projects, which followed participants for more than 75 years, revealed that the happiest and healthiest people weren't those who made the most money or achieved the highest status. They were the ones with the strongest social bonds. The conclusion was clear and consistent. The quality of our relationships determines the quality of our lives. Achor uses these findings to dismantle a myth that runs deep in American culture, the idea that success is a solo journey, built on independence and self-reliance. In reality, he argues, success is profoundly social. Whether in the workplace or at home, our greatest moments of achievement are rarely achieved alone. When we connect deeply with others, we tap into what Achor calls the social support network effect, a phenomenon where emotional, physical, and cognitive resources multiply through connection. Just as a network of computers is far more powerful than one machine, a network of people supporting each other can accomplish far more than individuals working in isolation. He illustrates this through one of his most memorable metaphors, the battle buddy system used by the U.S. military. Soldiers are never sent into combat alone. They're paired with a battle buddy, whose job is not only tactical but emotional, to watch their back, share burdens, and ensure no one feels alone in the fight. This principle is not just military wisdom, it's human wisdom. When we're facing stress, adversity, or failure, our instinct is often to retreat. But neuroscience tells us the opposite strategy works better. When we lean into connection, we activate brain regions that calm stress responses and boost problem solving. In other words, connection is our most effective defense against burnout and breakdown. Achor brings this to life with another real-world story, the aftermath of September 11, 2001. In the months following the tragedy, psychologists found that people who actively reached out, who talked to loved ones, joined communities, and helped others, recovered faster and reported higher resilience than those who isolated themselves. Even in the face of trauma, connection was the difference between despair and healing. This is the essence of the social investment principle. Happiness and recovery come not from retreating into solitude, but from running toward one another. He also connects this to the workplace, showing how social investment can transform teams and organizations. In high-pressure companies, employees often withdraw when overwhelmed, cutting back on lunch breaks, skipping small talk, or avoiding collaboration, believing that solitude increases productivity. But studies reveal the opposite. Teams that maintain strong social ties under stress are significantly more productive, creative, and adaptable. Achor cites data from Gallup's global workplace studies, which found that employees who reported having a best friend at work were 7 times more likely to be engaged in their jobs and performed better across every metric of success. To make this practical, Achor outlines what he calls the 3 levels of social investment. The first level is personal connection, maintaining close relationships with friends and family who provide emotional grounding. The second is professional connection, building meaningful bonds with coworkers, mentors, and peers. The third is communal connection, participating in larger networks, groups, or communities where shared purpose amplifies motivation. Each level strengthens the others, creating a robust support system that makes life's challenges manageable and meaningful. Achor also touches on an important nuance. Social investment doesn't just mean having people around you. It means actively nurturing those relationships. He explains that in today's digital age, we often mistake communication for connection. Sending emails or liking posts isn't the same as having real, human engagement. True connection happens through presence, empathy, and shared experience. It's the lunch conversation that lifts your mood, the late-night phone call that eases your worry, the coworker who listens without judgment. These moments of genuine connection strengthen our social muscle, making us happier and more resilient in ways no technology can replicate. He shares how this principle transformed his own life. During his years of teaching at Harvard and later traveling the world as a speaker, Achor found himself falling into a trap, prioritizing work over relationships, thinking he could make up for it later. But he soon realized that when he neglected connection, everything else suffered: his energy, creativity, and joy. The turning point came when he began treating social investment not as a luxury, but as a discipline, a daily habit as important as exercise or nutrition. The more he invested in people, his family, friends, colleagues, the more happiness and success followed naturally. The big promise of this chapter is simple yet profound. Your social connections are the greatest predictor of long-term happiness, performance, and well-being. No matter how intelligent, talented, or ambitious you are, your success will always be limited if you go it alone. But when you build and maintain strong relationships, you create a safety net of positivity that lifts you higher every time you fall. Achor's research shows that during periods of intense stress, people who increase their social investment experience a 23% higher level of happiness, a 36% improvement in resilience, and significantly lower rates of depression and anxiety. In short, relationships aren't just emotional support, they're psychological armor. By the end of Social Investment, Achor challenges listeners to rethink how they measure success. It's not just about achievements, money, or titles. It's about connection, belonging, and contribution. He encourages us to take concrete action. Call an old friend, thank a coworker, spend time with loved ones, or simply smile and connect with the people around us. These small acts don't just build relationships. They build the foundation of happiness itself. So, as this chapter closes, remember Shawn Achor's essential truth. When life gets hard, don't retreat, invest. When stress rises, reach out. When challenges hit, connect deeper. Because happiness doesn't exist in isolation, it lives in connection. The people around you aren't distractions from success. They're the reason you'll achieve it. That's the promise of Principle 7, Social Investment, that the more you give to others, the stronger, happier, and more successful you become. Because in the end, happiness isn't a solo journey. It's a shared adventure. And the best investment you'll ever make is in the people who walk beside you. Welcome to Chapter 10, Spreading the Happiness Advantage at Work, at Home, and Beyond, the powerful conclusion to Shawn Achor's The Happiness Advantage. In this final chapter, Achor takes everything we've learned, the 7 principles of positive psychology, the science of happiness, and the habits of success, and shows us how to multiply their impact far beyond our own lives. This chapter isn't just about becoming happier yourself. It's about creating a ripple effect, spreading positivity and resilience to your coworkers, family, friends, and communities in a way that transforms not only your own environment, but the lives of everyone you touch. Achor opens this chapter with one of the most inspiring and deeply human ideas in the entire book, that happiness is contagious. He cites fascinating research showing that emotions are not confined to individuals. They spread through social networks like waves in a pond. Studies from Harvard and Yale revealed that if someone in your direct social circle becomes happier, your own likelihood of becoming happier increases by about 15%. Even more astonishing, a friend of a friend, someone you might not even know personally, can still increase your happiness by 10%. The science is clear. Your mood doesn't stay with you. It travels. In other words, when you choose happiness, you're not just improving your own life. You're elevating the collective well-being of everyone around you. To bring this concept to life, Achor shares a powerful story from his consulting work with a Fortune 500 company going through a massive restructuring. Tensions were high, morale was low, and many employees were anxious about their future. But one mid-level manager decided to apply the happiness advantage principles not only for himself, but across his entire team. He began every meeting by asking each team member to share one positive thing that had happened in the past week, a small but powerful shift. Over time, this ritual changed the energy of the entire department. Instead of walking into meetings dreading bad news, employees started looking forward to sharing wins, celebrating progress, and recognizing each other's contributions. Productivity improved, turnover dropped, and even the company's leadership began adopting similar practices across other divisions. That's the ripple effect in action. Positivity spreading outward, changing culture, and creating measurable results. Achor refers to this phenomenon as the ripple effect, and it's the central theme of this final chapter. Just like a pebble dropped into water sends ripples far beyond its initial splash, small acts of positivity, a smile, a compliment, a gesture of kindness, create waves that reach people we may never even meet. In the workplace, these ripples can boost team morale, increase engagement, and foster a culture of trust. At home, they can strengthen family bonds, reduce conflict, and cultivate warmth. Beyond that, they can influence communities, schools, and entire organizations. He explains that this isn't just a feel-good idea, it's neuroscience. When we experience positive emotions, our brains release neurotransmitters like dopamine and oxytocin, chemicals that make us more social, empathetic, and cooperative. These biological reactions make positivity self-reinforcing. When we express kindness or gratitude, we don't just feel good, we make others feel good, which in turn makes them more likely to pass that positivity on. This creates what psychologists call emotional contagion, the unconscious spread of mood and energy throughout a group. Achor emphasizes that leaders, teachers, and parents, in particular, have extraordinary influence in this dynamic. Their moods set the emotional tone for everyone around them. A happy, optimistic leader can lift an entire team, while a negative, stressed-out leader can drain motivation in minutes. He then turns to the practical question: how can we intentionally spread the happiness advantage in our daily lives? Achor provides several real-world strategies drawn from his work across universities, corporations, and even hospitals. One of the most effective methods is modeling positivity. People don't change because we tell them to. They change because they see change working. When we embody the principles of happiness, gratitude, optimism, resilience, and connection, others instinctively mirror our behavior. It's a psychological phenomenon known as mirror neurons, the brain's way of mimicking emotional states observed in others. Simply put, when you smile, the people around you are neurologically primed to smile too. Another key strategy he outlines is creating positive rituals and systems. Happiness isn't sustained by random acts. It thrives in routine. For example, a team might start each day by sharing one thing they're grateful for, or a family might create a weekly tradition of celebrating small wins together. These habits create consistent emotional anchors that reinforce positivity even during stressful times. Achor calls this institutionalizing happiness, building positivity into the structure of your daily life so it becomes the norm, not the exception. He also discusses the importance of social support in sustaining the ripple effect. As we saw in Principle 7, relationships are the strongest predictor of long-term happiness. But here Achor takes it further, explaining how connected individuals create resilient networks that amplify well-being. When one person in a network begins practicing gratitude or kindness, it triggers a chain reaction. This means that one person's commitment to positivity can genuinely alter the collective mood and performance of an entire group. Achor then shifts the focus to families and parenting, showing how children model the emotional patterns they see in adults. Parents who cultivate positive emotions, even during chaos, teach their kids not just how to be happy, but how to recover from stress and adversity. This intergenerational ripple effect proves that happiness is not just contagious, it's teachable. When families practice appreciation, laughter, and empathy together, they build psychological immunity against the pressures of the modern world. To demonstrate the broader societal implications of the ripple effect, Achor references his work in developing countries and schools around the world. From rural villages in Africa to urban schools in the United States, he observed the same pattern. Communities that focused on positivity and connection consistently outperformed those that operated from fear or scarcity. When people believe that happiness and success are intertwined, they build systems, educational, corporate, and social, that uplift everyone. The big promise of this chapter, and really of the entire book, is that happiness isn't just a personal advantage, it's a collective one. When we spread positivity, we create environments where creativity flourishes, collaboration strengthens, and human potential expands. Achor's data shows that organizations with high levels of employee well-being outperform their competitors by up to 30% in productivity and profitability. In education, classrooms built on positivity see higher engagement and better learning outcomes. Even in healthcare, hospitals that foster a culture of optimism report faster patient recovery rates and lower staff burnout. But perhaps the most beautiful takeaway from this chapter is that spreading happiness doesn't require grand gestures. It begins with small, intentional actions, listening deeply, expressing gratitude, offering encouragement, or simply choosing kindness over criticism. Each of these actions sends a ripple outward, shaping a world that's not only more successful, but more humane. As the book concludes, Achor delivers one final challenge to his readers and listeners. Be the ripple. Don't wait for happiness to arrive from external sources. Generate it within yourself and share it generously. The happiness advantage isn't a private treasure, it's a shared gift. When we invest in happiness, our own and others, we create a cycle that multiplies strength, success, and joy. So as this final chapter closes, remember this: your attitude doesn't stop with you. Every smile, every kind word, every act of optimism is a spark that can ignite change in the world around you. The more you share it, the more it grows, at work, at home, and far beyond. That's the legacy of the happiness advantage, a reminder that happiness is not just an emotion, but a force of transformation. And when you learn to spread it, you don't just change your life, you change the world. And now, as we come to the end of The Happiness Advantage by Shawn Achor, we arrive at a powerful, uplifting realization, one that ties together every principle, every story, and every piece of science shared throughout this journey. The core message of this book is as simple as it is revolutionary. Happiness isn't the result of success, it's the cause of it. True fulfillment, higher performance, and greater resilience don't come from grinding ourselves into exhaustion or chasing distant milestones. They come from cultivating a mindset of positivity that empowers us to thrive in every area of life. In this conclusion, Achor reminds us that the 7 principles he's laid out aren't abstract theories. They're practical, science-backed strategies anyone can apply to change their brain, their habits, and ultimately, their reality. Each principle builds upon the last, beginning with the happiness advantage, the idea that a positive brain is more efficient, creative, and intelligent, then moving into the fulcrum and the lever, where our mindset becomes the tool through which we shift our world, and the Tetris effect, which shows how training our brains to look for patterns of possibility instead of problems unlocks lasting optimism. From there, Achor teaches us to fall up, using failure as fuel for growth, to embrace the Zorro circle, mastering control by focusing on what we can handle right now, to apply the 20-second rule, designing our environment so that positive habits become easy and sustainable, and finally, to invest deeply in others through social investment, building relationships that strengthen us far beyond individual success. Together, these principles form a roadmap to sustainable happiness, a happiness rooted not in denial or blind optimism, but in resilience, gratitude, and purpose. Achor emphasizes that this happiness is not a fleeting emotion. It's a skill, one that can be learned, practiced, and shared. The big promise of the book is that by applying these principles, we can literally rewire our brains. Neuroscience has proven that our minds are not fixed. They are endlessly adaptable. Through consistent, intentional habits, we can shift our baseline for happiness upward, creating a mindset that fuels achievement instead of waiting for it. The result isn't just feeling better, it's performing better. Happy doctors diagnose faster, happy salespeople sell more, happy students learn more effectively, and happy teams innovate more successfully. Happiness, Achor tells us, is not a luxury. It's a competitive advantage, the single most powerful tool we have to live more successful, meaningful lives. But beyond the science, the conclusion of the happiness advantage carries a moral truth that's deeply human. Happiness is contagious, and the way we show up in the world matters. Every smile, every moment of gratitude, every kind word sends ripples through our families, workplaces, and communities. We are not isolated individuals. We are emotional transmitters, constantly influencing those around us. The more we invest in happiness, both our own and others, the more the world responds in kind. Achor calls this the ripple effect, a reminder that when we choose positivity, we don't just improve our lives. We elevate everyone connected to us. As the book closes, Achor urges us to see happiness not as a finish line, but as the starting point of everything we want to achieve. We have the power to shape our reality by shaping our mindset. We have the tools to transform stress into growth, setbacks into opportunities, and daily routines into sources of joy. The happiness advantage is not a theory, it's a way of life. So, as you reflect on this journey, remember this: success doesn't lead to happiness. Happiness leads to success. Start small, think positive, act intentionally, connect deeply, and share generously. Because every time you choose happiness, you're not only changing your life, you're changing the world around you. And if you've enjoyed this deep dive audiobook summary of The Happiness Advantage by Shawn Achor, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to CliffNote Chronicles, your home for insightful, story-driven summaries of the world's most powerful books on success, mindset, and motivation. Hit that bell icon so you never miss an episode, and keep growing with us, one book, one idea, and one story at a time. Because here at CliffNote Chronicles, we believe in turning knowledge into action and turning happiness into your greatest advantage.